Hey, welcome back to 65 Drums. My name's Justin. Today I'm doing a versus video between the Gewa G5 versus the flagship Gewa G9. There's a massive price gulf between these two. The Gewa G9 flagship is over double the price, but the spec sheets are surprisingly similar. So in this video, we're going to go through everything with a fine-tooth comb to see if those differences are worth that price tag. But first I want to talk about how similar they are. What's the same between both modules? So the first thing is that they both have the exact same shell. Of course, they look a little bit different, and one has a screen and one has more ports, but the dimensions are identical. Both these modules have the exact same sound set. Both of them have about 901 sounds as long as you do the update. The next similarity is the trigger engine on the inside. Both of these will work with not only Gewa pads, but also Roland pads, ATV pads, Alesis pads, Yamaha pads. It will work with the majority of pads out there on the market. Gewa has improved their trigger engine over and over again with their updates, but it's still not quite on the level of trigger accuracy that you'll get out of the box from something like a Roland module or an ATV drum module. So just be prepared to jump into the trigger menus to get everything working just the way you want. Now the next similarity is that, as far as I can tell, they have the exact same editing features. They all have the same EQ settings that I can see. They have the exact same reverb settings, the exact same effects sections. Very, very similar. Just the way you interact with them is different because one uses a screen and one uses a button layout. The last thing I want to cover before we jump ahead into the legit differences is whether or not there's a sound difference between them. We know they have the exact same sound set, but what if like the G9 has more sample layers? Or maybe there's more round robin samples? Or maybe the overall resolution is slightly higher? I know that Yamaha did that between their DTX Pro and DTX Pro X modules. So is that happening here? I've got my Roland TD30 playing a MIDI pattern, so I've plugged that via a MIDI cable into the MIDI import of both modules. I'm going to play them both side by side, and you can be the judge if they sound any different. So I tried really hard to tell if there was a difference at all between the way they sounded, and I couldn't tell. So I asked my brother to come in and he listened to both modules, and he couldn't tell a difference either. Okay, so we talked about how similar these drum modules are, but now let's talk about the differences. The first thing to mention is the startup time. The G5 is up and running way quicker than the Gewa G9. My suspicion is that this is actually running off of Windows IoT. Now, is this going to make or break your decision? No, but it's something that is different between them. The second difference is the overall interface and ease of use. These both have their own pros and cons. I've used both of them extensively, and here's what I've learned. During the first 2 weeks of use, the Gewa G9 is a better experience because you can see more information on screen. Let's say, for example, I'm building a kit. I can choose from a list of different kick drums and cymbals, and you can just see more that's happening all at once. Meanwhile, over on the Gewa G5, because the screen is so small, you have to menu hop a whole lot more. It's also nice that when I'm inside of the trigger menu, I have an actual readout of the waveforms. That means that if I think I'm having crosstalk or if I think that I'm having double triggering, but I'm not quite sure, I can just look at the waveform and it will tell me. It's also convenient that all your trigger settings are in one menu. I also like having this big set list screen, and you can display PDFs on this, so I guess you could read sheet music if you were trying to learn a song. So there are some definite advantages of going with the touchscreen, but it also comes with a lot of downsides as well. The first is either on the CPU side or the screen side. They've made some improvements, but especially when using the fader, it is so laggy behind your finger. This is not like using a phone or an iPad. It's more like using a Generation 1 Amazon Fire tablet. Going off of how the interface reacts to your touch, it doesn't really feel like a $2,500 experience. Also, Gewa is trying to show you a lot of information on every single menu. That means they have less menus, but that also means the buttons are really, really tiny, and sometimes I'm trying to press a button and I just miss. That also means a lot of the text is also very small. The on-screen advantages for the Gewa G9 are great for the first 2 weeks, but over years and years of use over the long haul, the Gewa G5 ends up actually being the snappier overall experience. Because after I've built my handful of custom kits and I've made my adjustments, well, this takes longer to boot up every single day. Those seconds do matter over years of use. The next difference is overall headphone output volume. I've noticed that the G5 gets a little bit louder than the Gewa G9. Now this is at the exact same decibel range. If I crank both of them up, they'll get way too loud for any pair of headphones and it could hurt your hearing. But I just thought it was an interesting tidbit that I noticed when setting them both to the identical decibel range. The next difference is self-noise. So on the G9, it is whisper quiet. The main outputs, the headphone jack, if I'm not doing anything, there is no sound coming out of it at all. Meanwhile, over on the G5 that I have, even after I've factory reset it, even after I've put a successful software update on it, there is a low level of hum happening. This is coming not only out of the headphone jack, but also the master outputs as well. And it changes how loud the hum is depending on the menu that you're in. For example, if I'm on master, I don't really hear it. And then if I go to home, I hear the buzzing sound. Now I do need to stress that this is a very low level of self-noise. In fact, it's been playing right now and you probably haven't even noticed it. But now I'll boost the volume so you can actually hear what I'm talking about. The next difference is sample storage capacity. So on the Gewa G5, you can input 35 minutes of stereo audio samples. Meanwhile, over on the Gewa G9, you can input 160 minutes of stereo samples. And of course, the number doubles if you go to mono. Okay, so now let's move ahead to some differences that actually matter, and that is the inputs and outputs. So in total, the Gewa G9 gives you an extra 9 ports. On the Gewa G9, you get 2 extra pad inputs. They call them aux3 and aux4. You also get a bunch of extra outputs. So instead of 4 direct outs that the Gewa G5 gives you, you get an extra row on the Gewa G9, and it brings the total up to 8. While the Gewa G5 has 2 master right and left outputs that are 1/4 inch, the Gewa G9 gives you that as well, but their regular master outs are actually XLR. And then finally, the Gewa G9 gives you an SPDIF port. I don't know a single person in real life that actually uses those on drum modules, but it's a feature. Unless you desperately need to have XLR outs, you need to have 8 direct outs instead of 4, you really want to have an SPDIF port, and you really need those extra 2 pad inputs, unless you're that person, the G9 doesn't make sense. Having a touchscreen looks really cool, but really its main advantages sort of peter out after the first 2 weeks of setup. The only real black mark against the G5 compared to the G9 is that very low level of self-noise. But taken as a whole, the G5 is just way better value. It's $1,200 versus $2,500. But anyway, that's my thoughts on this. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. And of course, I always let you guys know how I get access to the gear that I'm reviewing. In this case, the company sent me these in order to make some videos about them, but no money changed hands. I'm not being paid to make this video, and I'm also mailing them back after I make this video. By the way, if you want to see these videos before anybody else, consider supporting 65 Drums on Patreon. That way I'm funded by you and not the drum companies. Have an awesome day, and I'll see you all in a few.